The cold morning settled over Prague. Stone walls held their breath. Inside a chamber high above the city, voices rose, angry, sharp, irreversible. This was not a battlefield. No swords were drawn. No armies clashed. Yet in a few moments, gravity would decide the fate of empires. Men would be seized, dragged across the floor, and thrown, not in chaos, but with purpose, through an open window. What happened here would ignite a war that swallowed Europe for 30 years. Millions would die. Kingdoms would collapse. And it all began with an argument. And a window. The act has a name. A strange one. A word so specific it could only be born from history. Defenestration. From the Latin defenestra, out of the window. In most places, throwing someone from a window would be madness. In Prague, it was a message. This was not a random act of violence. It was political. It was public. And it was intentional. Prague had seen this before. Windows were used when words failed, when authority was rejected, when power needed to be humiliated, not merely destroyed. To be thrown from a window was to be stripped of legitimacy, a declaration that rule had ended, without a sentence, without mercy. And on this day, the message was about to be heard far beyond the walls of Prague. Bohemia was a land divided, quiet on the surface, fractured underneath. For decades, Protestants and Catholics had lived in uneasy balance. Promises had been made. Rights had been granted. Freedom of worship was supposed to be protected. But power had shifted. The Catholic Habsburgs now ruled from afar, tightening their grip. Protestant nobles watched churches close. Letters were ignored. Warnings were dismissed. What had once been tolerance began to feel like a trap. Meetings grew tense. Trust evaporated. Every decision felt like an insult waiting to explode. This was not only a religious conflict. It was about authority. Who had the right to rule? And who had the right to resist? By the spring of 1618, Bohemia was no longer asking if something would happen, only where, and how violently. On May 23, 1618, the tension finally snapped. A group of Protestant nobles, fed up with broken promises and mounting fear, marched toward Prague Castle. Torches glinted in the morning light. Their footsteps echoed off the cold stone streets. Inside, the Catholic officials awaited, unaware of how close the walls had come to bursting. Vilém Slavata, Jaroslav Boroda of Martinice, and their secretary stood in the grand hall, confident in authority, unaware that authority itself was about to be rejected, in the most dramatic way imaginable. Words flew first, accusations, anger, threats. The air was thick with rage. But reason had fled. Then the nobles acted. Strong hands seized the men. They were dragged across the floor, toward the open window overlooking the city below. And in that moment, history tilted. A simple window would decide fates. A single act would ignite a continent-wide war. One by one, the officials were thrown from the window. Silence. Shock. Gravity taking its course. The city below held its breath. And yet, against all expectation, they survived. Some say it was a pile of manure cushioning the fall. Others whispered of divine intervention. But the truth was simple. They landed alive, battered and humiliated, but alive. The shock should have ended the conflict. Instead, it fanned the flames. What was meant to be a warning became a declaration of war. Prague had spoken, but the message had traveled farther than anyone imagined. An act meant to control had spun completely out of control. The defenestration was no longer a local outrage. It was a spark. And sparks, in history, can turn into raging fire. The fall from a single window didn't just bruise bodies. It fractured an entire continent. What began as a local dispute in Prague exploded into the 30 years. War, a conflict so vast it would consume millions of lives. Kingdoms toppled. Villages burned. Famine and disease spread like wildfire across Europe. Every decision, every small act of defiance, became magnified. Ordinary people paid the price while rulers played their deadly games. The war was not just about religion. It was about power, pride, and the refusal to compromise. And all of it traced back to that single act, a message thrown through a window. History remembers kings and nobles. But the cost was human. Every field scorched, every town emptied, every family shattered. And yet, people kept returning to the same mistakes, ignoring the lessons of Prague. Throwing someone from a window wasn't random. It was deliberate, symbolic. In Prague, a window was more than glass and wood. It was a stage, a declaration, a way to strip someone of dignity, authority, and legitimacy, without a trial, without a blade. Defenestration sent a message to anyone watching. Your power is temporary. Your promises mean nothing. It was humiliation turned into spectacle, fear turned into warning. An act designed to be remembered. And it was effective, not just for the victims, but for everyone who understood the stakes of defiance. In that single, horrifying moment, the window became more powerful than a crown. And the world would never forget the message it delivered. History is rarely kind. And the defenestration of Prague leaves. A lesson darker than the stones of the castle walls. When dialogue fails, symbols become weapons. When fear and certainty take root, even ordinary people can commit extraordinary acts. This was not a story of brute force alone. It was a story of human nature, pride, mistrust, and the refusal to listen. A window became more than a window. It became a choice, a warning, a turning point. And the lesson remains: when people stop talking and start pushing, the consequences can echo for generations. The open window still stands today, silent and unchanged. Yet its story speaks louder than any words ever could. A single act, an act of defiance, of anger, of desperation, ignited a war that tore Europe apart. Millions suffered. Empires shifted. Lives were lost. And all it took was a moment, a decision, a push. History doesn't only repeat, it whispers warnings. And sometimes, it shouts from the windows we refuse to notice.